Hi, this is Amanda.
And this is Jen.
And you're listening to Just This, a podcast that explores everything around being and becoming a mother or parent.
We're excited to have you join us as we dive into the practical details as well as the unseen energetics on topics that span from preconception to years after birth.
We're here today with as promised, which we don't always do when we say we're going to do something, with part two with Teny, our other mama Burning Man adventure. So we're gonna, I guess, keep rolling on the leaving your children theme because it's an important one, and I think
it is.
I think it's an important one, and on all fronts, and one that people struggle with a lot. So yeah.
Teny, so what was your experience in the?
Yeah, we'll start with
because yours was the youngest.
If just to say, if you haven't heard part one, you can tune into that. But basically, this whole conversation stemmed off of all three of us went to Burning Man 2023, and as you know, there's not a lot of opportunity to connect with the default worlds when you are at Burning Man. The cell phone reception is next to none. There is next to no Wi-Fi. That's changing with Starlink. The balance of, first of all, just leaving your kids in the first place, which I think both Jen and Teny had never done to this extent. And they dove into the deep end because they didn't just leave. They left with like a place where you will not be able to connect. And Jen brought up a really good point. It's, Burning Man or no Burning Man, it's important to be able to go to spaces, especially in nature, where we can just disconnect. Disconnection, well, connection is like a very beautiful thing. And I think Teny will probably speak to this very well. Disconnection is so important for us as human beings. And how do you balance that when you have a small one that is very emotionally and energetically attached to you and you're attached to them? And yeah, so that's where this whole conversation came from. So you know what you're getting into.
Thinking about the need for mothers, especially, not, I know this is a podcast about mothers, I'm not talking about male parents who also, by the way, leave their children much more societally acceptable. I mean, think about men leaving for like all kinds of things throughout the wars, travels, like trading, like throughout the millennia. It's just more common, like societally, right? But mothers are just sort of course, for many reasons, like more grounded into the dynamic. I was really thinking about the need for us as mothers to be able to engage with our inner child without being in relationship to our child. Because as you guys probably know, right, you do get to engage with your inner child when you have a child. Like you're looking at things anew, you're playing together, but you don't get to just play together. You're having to play and be the parent and, care for them. So it's almost more tiring in a way because you're having to parent and reparent yourself at the same time while you're also parenting. And so, for me, it like made me really feel into how we just got to be kids. We got to be kids. We got to go make a mess. We got to go ride around our bikes and like stay up until whatever we wanted, and I think it's so frowned upon because I think there's also this fear that like women are going to lose control because there is so much on us. And I just think about that but how freeing and liberating it was to have really no guilt or worry. There was no practical reason that I couldn't. Now, again, we talked about, I was not trying to like go to the top of that fucking LED light thing that looked like it was filled with water gallons. No, thank you. Right? Because I was still thinking about being a parent and like what would happen if I fell off of something and killed myself or maimed myself. But it wasn't the eyes, like the chameleon where my two eyes are going in all directions because I'm keeping an eye out for my kid. So I have really been thinking about like, when do we as mothers get to play and not just have like, oh, it was like 1 minute. I got 30 seconds to myself while I took a shit. You know what I mean? Like that's really what's been on my mind is like the space is not just to connect with nature and the dark mother and the mothering, but like just to fucking let a little loose and not be checking the clock all the time.
My thing was just not being bothered so much. Like oh, mama, I'm hungry. Mama, look at me. Mama, this like constant interruption of look at me, I'm here in your life. And I think that also, like, even if you gave yourself that space to be that child, be free, it's like you're constantly interrupted by this like responsibility to care for this other being.
I'm curious though, also. So one thing you brought up with like the men and the women, I do think there is a difference because a woman carries the child with the energetic connection.
Yes.
Because I brought this up in the first podcast, and I'd be interested in hearing this from you too. And then I also want to circle back to a second question, which I'll ask here. But when we first leave our child, like even for an hour or 2 hours, like a baby, when we first leave our baby, like how weird and hard that is. Like obviously it's not as hard for the man because the woman is literally, I feel like,
Absolutely.
energetically connected to that child in a totally different way because you created it
and
inside
biologically you're connected. You're in the fourth trimester, right? You're in like there's no actual difference between that. Yeah. So y'all talked about, the first time you left your kid. And I think I told you guys mine was the first time I had to go to get like emergency license at the DMV because my license had expired because it was COVID and they were accepting that. But I bought a car through Carvana because it turns out you can't have a baby in a tiny little hatchback. Like it just doesn't work. You can't even fit the stroller in. So they wouldn't accept the license. So I had to drive an hour in the pouring rain, pumping with a Haka pump. And I was like, motherfucker, this is my first time away from the baby. And then, of course, you're like, dad's going to kill the baby. The baby's going to die. I think there's definitely a biological imperative to it. And I think, like anything, you build the capacity to leave your child. Now, I was very conservative. We did almost like the 30 days. I mean, I was still working, trying to like hold the baby and type and do whatever. But
you were working.
Well, I was working as an owner of a business works, which is podcast alert. Being an entrepreneur and a mother. Oh, I didn't have the true luxury of completely disconnecting. Another fun story was I had given birth and then I like needed retrospect needed. I needed to get an email out. So I was writing the email like literally 36 hours postpartum, like having the baby, and the email deleted itself because the server was off, like did that. The one that I used, and I had an epic meltdown. Like it was the most epic meltdown you've ever seen.
Yeah. It's so hard to tell this, especially to entrepreneurs or business owners as first-time mothers. And I get it because I was one of those people where I'm like, having a baby is going to be so easy. I can just work away. And then it kind of is, to be honest. Babies are sleeping so much in that first month or two. And I actually did take, I think, 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, where I didn't work pretty much at all. But then I jumped into it way too fast. Like the one piece of advice I would to any business owner is try to plan for at least 3 months, at least, because otherwise it catches up to you.
Yeah. And you're sleeping every 2 hours. I mean, you're around the clock, not even sleeping. And two, I think the other thing that you guys talk about, this biological and energetic. Biologically in the past, we are the ones that provide food for them. Granted, now we have formula and all that stuff, but there's also, I think, innately that just we have to care and provide for this child. And if we're away for too long, I think it literally brings up something inside of our hormones or our brains that's like, hey, this is not 100% right. And now in our modern society, we kind of have to override that. Because, back in the community or tribe, if we were all living next to each other and we had a baby, we could potentially breastfeed each other's babies if we were gone for too long for some random reason, and support each other in that way.
My sister, I could do that for her.
Yeah.
It's
so societally inappropriate, but it's like, doy.
I was gonna say it's just this weird societal taboo.
Oh, we again, it's like, oh, so a baby drinking somebody else's breast milk. I'm like, you fucking drink cow milk.
It's not just the drinking of somebody else's breast milk, because that I think is more societally accepted, at least in my circles as a birth worker, because if there's not enough breast milk and there's donor milk, but it's like somebody else's baby sucking off of your titty or something.
I mean, we're getting off the theme of this podcast, but it's also like this ownership. Like we're so siloed where it's like, this is my family. That's your family. This is, and I think again, going circling back to the Burning Man, one of the things that I also really liked about it was, obviously it's a very sort of trippy, otherworldly, like we talked about, kind of unsustainable vision, but there was communal living, there was sharing of resources, there was gifting culture, and like it kind of gives you this like niggling feeling in the back of your mind where it's like, okay, no, I don't want to be in the middle of the desert, and no, can everyone turn their music off please at 7 a.m. I'd like to go to sleep, but how do I bring, these things back in? And we all have like our communities, and I feel pretty good about it. And I came back with the intention, I set the intention. I want the level of connection and openness that I felt here with myself to also then extend into my life. And I have, interestingly enough, met 3 new moms in the past 2 weeks that like I feel like I could actually connect with. So I do feel like there's this quality of community there, which also made me feel very good and aligned with being at Burning Man, because like I'm
Yeah.
not getting that experience in my everyday life, right? That's why
It opened you to the possibility of that in your life. Yeah.
I just even
So,
more.
okay, I'm curious too, circling back to just like the leaving your baby, now jumping back to present time, whatever that is. I want to know what you were feeling and a little bit of your, because going into it, before you even knew what you were getting into, before you were there, I mean, you kind of knew what you were getting into, but before arriving, what were some of the things you went through emotionally? And also, yeah, this feels scary, leaving my child, and also just making the decision. Like, what were the things that made you decide, like, this feels scary, but I'm still doing this?
Mm. So I think I think you just get to the point where you don't, your desires and needs out override. Like I was talking about the tipping point where it tips into like, this is a higher need than my fear is. So first of all, he was with my partner, and my child is like thriving in life in general. And that was the only reason I even considered it. There's no behavioral stuff going on. We also weren't like in the middle of potty training. He's securely attached. He loves school. His health is like, inshallah, it's good. Like, so he just is just a thriving 2.5-year-old. So there was that. And because I went to mystery school with you, Amanda, there were those times where I was gone for almost a week. It was like 6 days, right? So we were like inching towards it. I think the edge was the no contact, but again, we had even played with that in the mystery school container because I really tried to keep my phone away for at least those 3 days, right? And so I like think that I so badly want to surrender and like take a step. And so I think I did, I was like trying to plan this, plan that, like make sure he has enough diapers, make sure it was like partner's competent. There's a store, like, yeah, we do cloth diapers. If he just for some reason can't get it, it's called there's the store, there's food, grounding into like, so, Luis uses that term, the overcoupling. I've overcoupled like my presence with stability here. And the reality is life goes on even if mom isn't there. And I mean, I know that's a harsh reality, but it's something I've been thinking about and meditating on. God forbid anything happen to myself and my partner. But we know that just like human life continues and people are resilient and they learn skills and tools to heal. I'm like inflating my own ego and sense of importance to think that like my child is going to be irreparably permanently damaged because I left. Now I did talk to him about leaving, which was like I was like, hey, mommy's going away on a trip. I'm thinking about you. And I brought that little pinky, like little stuffed unicorn, which was kind of like my talisman. So I was like, I'm doing this for my son because if I'm not a whole person, good fucking luck like raising him when he's in his teens. How am I going to teach this person to be a person who listens to his own self? So it just felt aligned. Like when you texted, like you were like, hey, do you really want to go? And it's a yes for me. It's a sacral yes. I had some concerns, and then I let them exist. And then I got on the plane, and like then, I don't know about you guys, but like once I'm on the plane, and it's the same with the business, like I don't even really think about the trip until I'm like on the plane, because that means I'm actually leaving.
Yeah.
My plans have not been thwarted.
Mentally, that, he's going to be fine. Like you're talking about, they're going to thrive. Everything's going to be okay. And I think a lot of people really dismiss that. And it's not that I was looking for confirmation that he was going to be okay, but really, Amanda, you asked about like what it is that you did kind of help yourself somatically. And mine was kind of express that out to my circle and just be like, yeah, I am actually a little anxious and a little nervous. But I think that, if you're on the other end of a mom that's expressing concern about leaving their child, I think sometimes just being the support and just listening and be like, yeah, it's going to be anxious, and kind of feeding back to them as opposed to dismiss how they're feeling and saying like, he's going to be fine. Of course, I think every one of us knew our kids were going to be fine, right? Did anyone think that their kid wouldn't be?
We mentioned this in the other podcast, and I really think this helped me is having other moms there with me. I had done this before, like the last time I went to Burning Man without my kid and with my partner, there weren't any other moms I knew at the time that were like good friends that had done or were doing the same thing. And not to say there weren't out there, like I just didn't have them in my circles because I was one of the first of my friends to have kids. And it did make it a lot harder. And I mean, like, there's probably multiple factors that made it easier this time. My child's older. This is the second time I've done it. But I do think there is an element of having others that if you do have your moments where, like you said, you want to speak your fears, you want to speak your feelings, because I think it is very healthy to express those, that you have people that can hear that and be there and understand and hold that space, which we all had to some extent. I don't know. Hopefully, Teny, you felt like you had that.
No, absolutely. And I was just thinking, it would also it just gave me permission. You gave me permission to even come. I wouldn't want to be with, not anything against anybody. Everyone has a beautiful life experience, but like, fuck, we have to fight to get to these places. This is not just a money commitment. It's a spiritual journey to work through the feelings. And then sometimes, right, using your discernment of like, wow, I really want to do this thing. My child is not in a space where I feel comfortable leaving them. And so there's also that balancing of, it's not just about me, to be around other people who also I know have worked so hard to cultivate mindful relationships with themselves, their kids, their partners, to then go and just have fun is different for me than somebody who doesn't have as many barriers to that, because I can, I am a little bit judgy sometimes. I'm like, yeah, it's easy for somebody who has no tethers sometimes to get out. And of course, I don't know everyone's circumstances, but sometimes in my mind, it's just nice to be around people who I know have a lot at stake as well, to be present in that moment and know that there's a lot of things working in their mind that could keep them from that present moment, and like to enjoy that with somebody is awesome. And we also had like even Brody, who's now an older dad, could hold some of that space for us, because he was like, I remember when I had young kids, it was all in all the time. So it was kind of a really nice blend, I thought, of just life experiences. And like you were saying, Jen, to be witnessed. I don't need someone to tell me my kid's going to be fine, because to be totally honest, there's always actually a chance that they're not going to be fine. And that's what I've been working on as a mom. Like, I have no control. I have no control over what happens. Even when my kid is standing right next to me, I don't know that everything's going to be fine. I just have to kind of keep surrendering into every second again and again. And I can't live my whole life expecting something terrible to happen, because like that's not life. So
yeah.
Do we want to kind of expand into that? And I know we were thinking this could be a whole nother podcast topic, but I'm really curious, just so we're here. So let's go there. I always, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, Teny, and yours, Jen. Obviously, maybe it's everyone's lesson, but my big lesson is like, how deeply can we surrender, right? In life, like how much, and having a child has definitely been a crash course and expansion in my ability to surrender. However, there is always in the back of my mind, well, where's the balance of surrender? And yet as a parent, we can't just fully surrender.
What comes up for me is surrendering and survival. Just because I'm surrendering doesn't mean I won't fucking kill you if you try to hurt my child, right? Like, I mean, like, there's this element of survival where, like, I hiked out 3.5 miles. I don't give a fuck. I would have walked 10. I'm getting to my kid. And we talked about that too. So we also have the biology of surviving. And so I think sometimes, I don't know what spiritual,
Piscean state. I call it a Piscean state. The fully
like in a world that's etheric, where it's like nothing matters. What is time? Like, I'm not even real. Cool. My feelings on that. We're tethered here by the most magnificent thread of children. And even then, at some point, right? Terminal illness, something else happens. There's a moment where you're like, okay, circumstances out of my control means that tether on this plane is gone. But that doesn't mean that even while I'm surrendering to something, doesn't mean there's not some kind of boundary and constraint around it. Because again, like, we're in bodies, and then we're doubly so, because now we have this body that is our charge to get to a certain level to then sort of release. And so, I mean, I could tell you my extreme crash course of like surrendering, because I don't know what happened. Like I had the baby, and then like literally within 12 hours I'm holding the baby, you know, the hormones are just like exiting your body in like copious quantities and things are happening. I'm literally holding Felix, sobbing, because I'm like, oh my God, I made something, he's gonna die. And then if he's lucky, I'm gonna die before he dies, and he's gonna be so fucked up because I'm gonna die. I mean, it was like Samsara Wheel 101 like came crashing down, but it was like this real of like somatic understanding of, yeah, bitch, we bought into life and death. That shit's intense. That's kind of where I start with that. I want to hear what Jen has to say, but I have a really interesting somatic niggle of wisdom about that.
So my idea of surrendering is just basically that, I surrender when I don't have control over things, especially like when things are outside of my control. That's when I really try to practice surrendering. And then also really trying to surrender to myself and my needs. I think one of the things that I really learned early on in single parenting was I used to feel guilty for like taking time away. Like I'd be like, I need to take a bath for an hour. And, my son would be in the other room doing nothing on the iPad or playing or whatever. And there'd be like this sense of guilt of not being with him, basically providing time with him. But over time, I just realized that we really have to also like honor ourselves. And I think that also goes back to taking time away from our kid, that having that space and time away, it really recharges us in a way that's much, much healthier for our kids and for us too, because I realized over time, those times in the bath, even though it was an hour away, like I gave him so much more by having more patience with him, more compassion with him. And then when I did show up with him, I was way more present than I was had I just like skipped the bath and been like, don't be a bad mom, be with them. And the other time I really try to surrender, going back to that when I want things, say I want to complete my midwifery and I need to do these modules, there's a certain aspect that I have to surrender that it's going to get done in the time that it's going to get done. And I have to make an effort and like show up in the way that I can. But ultimately, I need to surrender to the process and the way that it's going to flow and how it happens. So surrendering to me is in two parts. Being a day late, like we can control it. Like I can't control the weather. Maybe one day we can. And then the other one is just surrendering to like sometimes to our dreams, like putting our dreams out there and surrendering to allowing them to happen. And our intentions, like with you, Teny, you like really surrendered. You're like, hey, I need a sense of community. And you surrendered like, this is what I need. And I'm going to surrender and allow it to happen. And sure enough, within 2 weeks, it showed up. So that's my kind of take on surrendering. Amanda, did you have what's your take on it? You kind of threw the question out there.
I find it more in a situational sense to be interesting as a parent, because you do find yourself in situations where you don't have a choice in certain situations. They're there. You have to surrender. And also as the parent, we were talking, like Teny had mentioned and tapped on, like, I just do nothing. I sit and I like allow, which there is a balance. You should do that in some capacity. But how much of that should you be sitting and allowing? And when do you step in and make a move without being too controlling, I guess? And that's where I find a dance. And I'm always trying to be like a third person awareness above myself of like, how much am I trying to control this? And how much am I actually moving forward given the situation in a way that seems to be in alignment with the situation versus controlling. And so that's where I find that balance of surrendering, I guess, action and the responsibility of being a parent, a human, whatever, but also detaching yourself from your ego. So I don't know, Teny, did you want to circle back to your...
I was going to say what I'm thinking about when you say that is like co-creating. You're co-creating with the circumstance. You're co-creating with your child, you're co-creating with the external, you're co-creating with the nature versus like, am I trying to direct this? Or am I passively like stepping on being like, I don't know, which the reality is neither. We co-create at all times, right? So there's like agency there. And I love when you said, really when you fully surrender, spirit can come in. And as you know, we've all three felt that when you're like, spirit is moving through me, I'm co-creating, I'm using my body, I'm doing this thing, but I feel divinely guided and aligned. Like there's just that peace that comes over, even if it's the most resignation about the most shitty situation. once you've surrendered to just what is, it feels easeful in a way that other things don't. So that's usually my thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I want to share for the millions of listeners to this podcast is one thing that really fucking blew my mind was that we often bypass not when something is bad, but when something is so good. So I really started to notice when I would go into that thinking, it would be when I was with my child, the love was so much. It was like I almost couldn't hold it. And so then what did my mind do? It was like, this is unsafe. This is unsafe for our body. We need to like think about how this can be controlled and segmented and like shut down, because it's actually sometimes safer for us to feel anticipated loss, anticipated grief, versus like just being in the moment of like basking in a situation where like I love this person, whatever, this thing, this circumstance, this moment so much that like I'm completely wide open. And so that was such a amazing reframe for me. And like I've really thought about that, like how it's usually right. That usually when I go into some kind of like, you know what I mean? Like mental process that starts to constrict me, it's because I feel so opened by like the love. And that just for me is mostly with my kid, not just, but mostly with Felix, because it's just so
Can you give
unique.
an example?
Like, for example, I was staring at my son. I had just given birth, right? And I'm looking at him and I'm like, oh my God, here's this bean that I built. We built together, right? We built it. And I'm looking at him and I remember feeling so much sensation. Let's not even call it love. Let's say sensation, intense sensation, whether it be bonding or whatever, post birth, whatever. And due to my own capacity not being consciously built to hold that, and also think about our society, like we're hedonistic in ways, but we also are like deeply disassociated from it. So it's kind of like we never fully like feel the passion and love and connection, because it can feel very scary. That then I think my mind, and it's okay, like went into, oh my God, I love this thing and this thing's gonna die, and then this thing's going to love me and I'm going to die. And it wasn't that it was like the wrong thing. It was just, I think, a reaction to try to staunch the flow of love. It was like my body was like, you're bleeding, there's too much going out, there's too much coming in, like. And I just noticed that even in situations with community or when my business, I mean, I think all of you can attest, when things are going too well, there's that part of you, right, that starts to get like hyper vigilant, like, oh no,
Yeah,
something's
we
going
hit our
too well.
glass
And so
ceiling.
that's the thing I think that we work on. And that's so much of parenting with, of course, there's going to be ups and downs, but it's how do I remain open to that flow of love? To me is surrender. Like I love this person so much, and I cannot absolutely control whether or not they're going to talk to me when they're older. I can't even control whether or not they're
Yeah.
going to be alive. And so that level, right, where they're meanwhile so dependent on us and we're enmeshed, right? Like how do we not be enmeshed on some levels? Like how do we create an interdependency versus a codependency when the relationship is so intense? It's just something that I like think is fucking hilarious.
It is. It's a big cosmic joke. I mean, piggybacking on this and just like a very simple term, in that first, I see this, I mean, I experienced it. I feel like so many people experience this in that first like year to 2 years postpartum also is, and you touched on this also, Teny, when we were saying, oh, we can't wait to get back to our kids. And you're like, and then there's going to be those frustration moments, holding on to that space of those beautiful expansive moments, even in between the moments where we want to pull our hair out or we're so exhausted or we're crying ourselves to sleep because we're like, what the fuck do we do? We gotta baby this. Yeah. Because there are those moments where like you could have the worst day and then all of a sudden your baby's lying next to you asleep. They just seem like the most angelic thing in the world. And I like this simple practice, and I was taught this even before parenting, and I forget who taught it to me, but I think it's a great practice. Kind of just reminding yourself to hold that capacity or just be there, is like, thank you, yes, more, please. And when you're in a moment of that, if you can just state to yourself, thank you, yes, more, please, of allowing yourself to be just grateful, I'm accepting this and I want more of this. And I just like those simple words to me okay, and blah blah blah. You start to think about like, turn on to the negative thing. Yeah.
I love that. And we were saying that at Burning Man, and I was
Burning
just
Man, because
thinking,
everything was thank you, yes, more
well, yeah,
please.
and we were also just like, I was just thinking about how like it really was kind of like a retreat. We were expanding our capacity for joy and all things outside of the relationship of being a parent. We are here for ourselves, and then of course, like as you know, rolls out. But yeah, I do love that, and I like have been saying that to myself. And of course, now it's very different than it was one day postpartum, but it has been interesting to see that, and in other people as well. Right now you
Yeah.
recognize the pattern. The influx of intense goodness is often when we just totally check out.
I think it's easier to check out as our kids get older because they become less and less dependent on us, right?
Yeah.
It's that energetic connection is slowly dissipating, like as they grow older. It's not that it's easier, but it's more apparent. I think sometimes if you're checking out in those early postpartum, or it feels maybe more jarring versus, I don't know what your thoughts on that, Jen and Teny, are, but as like the kids get older, we can often forget that we're checking out. We're doing it and we're not even like aware that we're doing it because, I don't know, maybe it's you
Because they're
become
not constantly sucking on our titties, you mean?
yeah,
Because
because you're
they're
you
not
have more
omnipresent.
autonomy. I don't know what it is, but I feel like yes, it yeah, speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I want to go back to the surrendering thing. I think ultimately, like the places that I see ultimate surrendering is during birth. I mean, ultimately, like that is just, you have to go in and you have to totally surrender to like what's happening to your body, the pain that you're experiencing, or any sensation. And even postpartum, Teny, like you were talking about, I personally, like when I look at I'm ultimately surrendering, and each day he's growing further and further away from me. From the day he is born, his job is to disconnect from me. They're ultimately leaving us. Going back to like the checking in or checking out, Amanda, I actually find, and maybe it's different because of my situation being a single parent and stuff, I actually find I'm more aware of when I'm checking out with my son now than I was when he was younger. And that's possibly just because like Teny said, they're just like attached to your breast all the time, and like they're constantly on you, that you're just like constantly doing other things that the awareness just wasn't really there. I mean, I've seen parents zone out in all different stages. So maybe it's not necessarily the age that they are, but like kind of what's happening in your life. Kind of going back to traveling and being away from your kid. I'm a big believer that it's really good for kids to be under the care of other people and not us. Like, I think that's such a great skill for them to develop. And also for us, like you said, to like let go of control and really surrender that I don't need to be the only person to caretake for my child. Other people can do it just fine. They're going to do it differently. And, at the end of the day, our kids are going to love us because we're the moms. But I think it's important that there's boundaries set by other people and all that
Hopefully they'll
stuff.
love us. They may not, and that's okay too.
Oh no, because you know what? We've all learned one thing: the primary attachment issue is always with mama. So it's like, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter don't do. There's just going to be that connection for life. That's my belief. Is like energetically speaking, you are unable. First of all, I don't believe in I don't believe in truly severing cords. That's again podcast alert. That's totally separate topic, but I think because truly there is stem cells are exchanged, right? You are literally of your birthing parent. Doesn't matter what you want to say or do, there is a connection there. Okay, and I just want to say, I don't know, not that you guys don't do somatics, but disassociating is not a negative thing. It's a highly complex
You are the somatic
mechanism.
expert here. I will give you
So
that.
like it's
You are
not a
100%.
bad thing, listeners.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. It's one of your body's trauma responses, and it's highly evolved. I would say absolutely. I disassociated for my own sanity constantly. You had to, because again, no judgment to anybody who did not. Felix was completely breastfed. Like he never had a fucking ounce of anything except my breast milk. So there was a lot of times when I was like, part of me surrendered to my ego and myself doesn't want to be here, but my higher self was like, well, tough titties, girl, you can either choose to give them formula or you can have them on your titty, right? I had agency in that choice. I had agency. So I think I was also exhausted, but I would say now, and also I'm seeing him as a mirror of me, right? So
Mhm.
I'm showing him how to be engaged. I'm showing him how to be present. And like, I'm like, so now I'm super conscious when I'm, looking at my phone when I really shouldn't be, versus like when he was a baby, like again, his mouth was like his eyes were looking at my nipple. He couldn't see what I was doing. He didn't care what I was doing. So I'm definitely in the camp of the first year was a lot of me consciously saying, okay, I'm going to give myself permission, put in my headphones while he's nursing and watch movies because, like, otherwise I'm not going to survive. Like, I can't. Whereas now it's just different. But I agree with you, Jen, too. Last thing I'll say, that feeling of their goal is to leave you and our goal is to release them. And as somebody who has like attachment things I'm still working on, that's like really a fun thing to play with. We're not abandoning each other and there's no such thing, like we don't abandon each other, like this is the whole process, but it's so tender. And again, it's like the reparenting, again, the need to go fucking let our inner child out sometimes and play and be silly, because this is real fucking work we're doing here, like to break the patterns of the past, and especially the parenting patterns of our parents and the trauma there. It's no small feat of what I believe our generation is doing. Truly, like I think
Mhm.
it's unprecedented work
And
in that way.
on that note, I think like in the show notes we can list some resources. I know basically what you're speaking to is attachment styles in some sense, and Jen actually is very, in the last couple years, has gotten very familiar with attachment styles and worked in that field as well. So we can link some stuff there, because if you don't know or if you haven't explored attachment styles as a parent, it is so insightful.
Mhm.
It's yeah, like coming back to what you said, like a lot of your children is going to be reparenting yourself, and that's a really beautiful thing because they give you a really great opportunity to do that, but don't pass up that opportunity. Just it's
Yeah.
yeah, just don't
Yeah.
pass it up.
And Teeny, I really love how you say that disassociating is not a bad thing, because actually babies do that. Like if you notice, like newborn babies, like within, 24 hours, well, maybe not 24 hours, but a little bit older, when they start to look at you, when they actually look away, it's for them to like actually disassociate and help
Mm-hmm.
re-regulate their nervous system, because they just need a break from all the sensations or things that they're experiencing. So I love that you actually brought that up, because I never thought about that from like an adult perspective, because we're always supposed to kind of be on. No, we do need that time to actually just disassociate for a period of time to kind of help re-regulate our system. So I love that you brought that up.
All things are welcome in the holistic system of self. That's like my,
Yeah.
like all things are welcome and they're really
Yeah.
sophisticated. And like, again, think about us being human parents. No other animal has this long of a rearing process. Like there's a reason we're biologically attached, because otherwise we'd be like, fuck this. I'm throwing this
Yeah.
baby in the woods. I am not doing this.
Proud.
We have to cope because we are a singular species. And I just think it's amazing. I am always like trying to reframe, like, how is this serving me? Especially when we don't have the ability to set boundaries with an infant. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just can't, right? There are no boundaries. And so
Yeah.
we have to cope the best we can, especially as
Yeah. I think one of the other things I really surrender to is the fact that there's kind of really to be something in my son's life where he's going to be traumatized by it. And I think
Mm.
when I surrender to that fact that like there's going to be something that happens and I'm going to like quote unquote fuck him up, right? And he's going to be totally traumatized by it. And I think after like kind of accepting that and surrendering to it, it gave me a lot of space to actually just be the best parent that I could be, and not, and that's it. And move forward from that and be like, you know what, I'm going to do my best. And no matter how great I do or how perfect, he's going to
Yeah.
be traumatized.
My take on this is that we all come to this world, and this is where the family systems, I think, is very interesting, even in your own, like not just your child, but whatever your own experiences with your family. I really believe we chose to come here together to like work on whatever lessons that we're like predestined for ourselves
yes,
as our soul's purpose. And sometimes we learn them, sometimes we don't. This is our playground, and it's like school. Sometimes you advance, sometimes you learn lessons, sometimes you're just kind of like, oh, like maybe I need to study this a little bit longer, and you come back another time. But that's my take on it. I think it's important to remember that for you as the child in your parenting system, as well as your child coming into whatever system you are, we're all here just teaching each other, and we've kind of like chosen each other. I really personally believe that. It's
yes.
pretty woo maybe out there for some people, but that really helps me with the surrender of that part, is like, hey, like you said, we're all just doing the best we can. And we've chosen to teach each other's lessons. Like my child's teaching me a lesson. I was teaching my parents a lesson. It's not hierarchical. Like we are actually just like classmates kind of thing.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah, 100% agree.
Trauma is our birthright. Okay. My teacher says trauma is a beautiful thing because it allows us to be like alive, and it's not a stigmatized thing, like we overuse it. So just remember, trauma's our birthright, baby.
Yeah.
That's what we came here for.
Trauma's our birthright. It would be boring in life without trauma.
Very. So the end of this podcast is do whatever the fuck you want, because trauma's your birthright. So
awesome. Well, this was I really like where this conversation went, and any parting, I think trauma's our birthright is like a really great parting words. We'll put some really good resources. Teny, I'd love to get some of your resources, and Jen too, and we'll put those in the show notes in case you guys do want further information, and let us know if you like this conversation. Hit us up. Yeah, we'll have Teny back, I'm sure. She'll be our somatic parenting expert here.
Yeah, and we should definitely do a entrepreneur one with everyone too.
For
Entrepreneur
sure.
Moms. Yeah, for sure.
Our second child.
Second child, yes.
my first child.
So your yeah, I guess it's really truly your first.
She's 10 years
first.
old.
Yeah.
She's feeling herself. She thinks she knows everything.
And how to release that too when they grow into a teenager, and you can just say, okay, I don't need to be there anymore. So yes, really.
Hey there, amazing listeners. We just want to say a huge thank you for tuning into our convo on the Just This podcast today. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and your continued support means the world to us.
If you enjoyed this episode and found value in it, we would be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, or share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it too. Your reviews and shares not only motivate us, but they also help others discover our show.
We're also all about keeping the conversation going and hanging out with our incredible community. Head over to justthis.site, that's justhis.site, where you'll find additional resources, ways to connect with us, and join the conversation, plus some more goodies.
Thank you again for being a part of the Just This community. We'll be back soon. Until next time, remember to take care of yourself and embrace the wonder as you navigate this extraordinary adventure.